So what is the meaning of all these great transformations then? The message is actually optimistic. It just indicates what we can learn. So what we can learn from these great transformations is that fundamental social changes are possible, which is what we are looking for in this sustainability challenge. Considering the immense differences between hunter-gatherer society, agrarian society, and industrial society in terms of production, coercion, cognition, exchange, etc., it's possible that a future society may be equally different. We can also learn that a new great transformation may require each society to first pass through industrial society, that it is likely to start in one place as a result of a unique and complex combinations of various factors, and that the new type of society will only spread if it somehow gives advantages in the competition with others. It's also important to note that such a new great transformation is unlikely to be designed by purposeful human activity, at least not with a clear picture of what the end result will be until we have already transformed into this new system. That's scary, and yet that's how things have worked. Men and societies frequently treat the institutions and assumptions by which they live as absolute, self-evident, and given. They may treat them as such without question, or they may endeavor to fortify them by some kind of a proof. Right? So let's imagine, just for the sake of this argument, that Sweden, Denmark, and Norway, and some small Scandinavian countries like these, which are small, homogeneous, and rich, are kind of trying hard to be sustainable, renewable energy, and so on. Let's say they reach some kind of a new structure that looks kind of very good in terms of sustainability, but also as a competition to survive in the warming world safely, and safe food, water, energy, health, transportation, buildings, competition, standard of living for everybody. Then will every other country try to follow the same social structure in some way, adopt it in some way, or will it be impossible for the global south as opposed to the global north, and so on? So these are difficult questions, but as we said, these are kind of a black swan events on a slow time scale, that change happens and you look back and you see that some big changes happened and you didn't even plan it or get ready for it or expect it, and so on. Geller's words resonate disturbingly well with our current global dialogue, or lack of substantial dialogue, on key sustainability challenges, which are elaborated on in chapter 3 below, which we'll come to next. For instance, the trade of carbon offsets that applies contemporary market principles for attempting to address the challenge of climate change. Recent history has, I didn't end it on a proper high. So, for instance, the trade of carbon offsets that applies contemporary market principles for attempting to address the challenge of climate change. So this is something that is happening within the global dialogue. Recent history has seen more rapid changes in the transactions of humankind than ever before, but the prevailing paradigm, dominated by the rules of market capitalism, is rarely questioned in the mainstream, and that there are few signs of any fundamental changes on the horizon. Perhaps we are in the middle of a new great transformation. It's difficult to tell, but if we continue to only think within the frames of our current paradigm, I'm afraid that the world as we know it is lost in a not too distant future. So we are negotiating, we are defining global warming targets, we are saying how urgent action is, and yet we are continuing life as usual, business as usual. Emissions keep going up. And maybe there is enough change happening with all the renewables and the way the youth is perceiving climate change, either with great trepidation and anxiety, or hoping for a change, and some threshold will be crossed. It's, in other words, more crucial now than ever to understand past social change in order to facilitate social change now toward a more sustainable future. So carbon offsets, changing the world by not changing the world. So what do we mean? So offsets basically means you cannot reduce the emissions you are putting out because of your manufacturing business or your travel or your eating meat and other habits, and then you pay someone to somehow offset that carbon for you, so that somebody increases their carbon sequestration or reduce their carbon footprint in addition to what they would be already doing, so that you are somehow overall bringing down emissions, and somehow you hit a threshold and tip over. Well, this is obviously a optimistic vision or expectation, but nonetheless we cannot sit and imagine that will continue to function as we have been since Industrial Revolution and then make a difference. So the question here is whether transformation is being planned and designed and implemented, or is it something we are just heading towards in a zombie walk, like we did manage the COVID pandemic without a real good solid global plan. Everybody did their own thing and we somehow came on the other side now, and hopefully the COVID pandemic is gone, right? So what happened next? It's the invention of risk that is seen by this author as something really a transformation as well. As we started the initially slow transition toward modernity in the 16th and 17th century Europe, new ideas started to form concerning the contingent nature of our world. So the invention of telescope, microscope, and other ideas, Da Vinci and who else? Galileo, Copernicus, new ideas kept coming on. In antiquity and throughout the Middle Ages, Christians had generally adhered to the Augustinian view that fate was simply God's natural order, and similar determinism was found in the other world religions of that time. If the outcome of any course of action was already predetermined or predestined, it mattered little what choices we made as mere human beings. In Indian culture we say it's all destiny and it's fate and so on. Chance had no place in God's world, and nobody had any concept of risk except in some marginal contexts. Then a new idea emerged, the idea that advantages could be gained only if something was at stake, and that these stakes were not only a matter of costs directly tradable against the advantages, but a matter of decisions that would be regretted if a loss occurred that we had hoped to avoid. So people started to define risk and perceive risk, and then define it and take action to alleviate it, to avoid it, by making deals or taking action of, let's say, insurance kind of risk underwriting came along, and so on. So although the notion of divine will was not yet openly questioned, as that would have had dire consequences for the individuals doing so, we were starting to realize our own agency in defining and managing risk. Right? So here is a figure of Galileo Galilei that I just mentioned, who pushed for questioning the order of things. So you had to be careful at the time what you said against the church or the beliefs of the community and society, because you could be lynched or hanged for questioning the divine will and so on. The etymological origin of the word risk is ambiguous, with suggestions ranging from the Arabic word risk, R-I-S-Q, meaning anything that has been given to you by God, the Latin word risicum referring to the challenges to the sailors, and Greek word riza, R-H-I-Z-A, referring to hazards of sailing, etc. So people who were out there facing challenges began to use some form of risk to quantify what they were facing, or to communicate what they were facing that was maybe beyond just the concept of divine will. Regardless of which, the word risk is suggested to have come into English through Spanish or Portuguese, which were the primary maritime nations of the 15th and 16th century Europe. Although the Babylonians had invented basic risk transfer schemes thousands of years earlier, which was later spread to the Phoenicians, Indians, Greeks, Romans, etc. It was among the maritime merchants of that time that early forms of modern insurance emerged. As the oceans were perilous and the loss of both the ship and cargo was common, these traders organized to share the cost of each loss within a larger group. From being relatively uncommon but catastrophic for the lone unfortunate merchant, the cost of losses became more frequent but bearable for each merchant in the collective. So there came the idea of sharing the risk and having some kind of an insurance. You are staying on land and sending somebody out on the ocean hoping they will come back with a bounty of spices, gold, or whatever else. So you are underwriting the risk by offering to pay in case they lost the ship and the loot in that sense, right? In India, you still have the idea of, trying to figure out if bad things are happening and if there is a way to worship God or offer something to God to reduce that risk or to get rid of the risk and so on and so forth. So the risk concept has always existed and people have tried to deal with it in various ways. So let's read a little bit more and then come back. The revolutionary idea that defines the boundary between modern times and the past is the mastery of risk. The notion that the future is more than a whim of God's and that men and women are not passive before nature. Until human beings discovered a way across that boundary, the future was a mirror of the past or the murky domain of oracles and soothsayers who held a monopoly over knowledge of anticipated events. Like the astrologer who will start telling you something and immediately offer to pray for you for a large sum of money to take care of your risk and protect you from this danger that they see in your future, right? So this is kind of the idea of risk, which has become now a big thing even in the IPCC context. We define risk, as we'll see later, or we have seen in Adaptation and elsewhere, as a multiplier of hazard, which is, let's say, natural disasters, exposure, which depends on various factors, vulnerability, which depends on a number of factors, and now we have also added response. So hazard, vulnerability, and exposure. Now we have added response in terms of disaster management. So the governments can underwrite risk and reduce the risk to be left with just what we call residual risk, which is irreducible, and then responsibilities are assigned to the insurance companies, to the government, to individuals, and so on. So we'll come back and continue, and we are close to finishing this chapter, even though I keep saying that. We are really close.